So the next thing I want to talk about just before we move to actually adding our connection string to our Mongo Connect file, I just want to talk a little bit about the actual flow of our application because I feel like this is a huge issue, understanding why we're choosing this particular flow. And I think the best way to do it is by using this flowchart that I created here, which is broken into different pieces, as you can see. I'm going to put this on the left. I'm going to open our code block on the right. Give me 1 second here just to grab this. There we go. And I'm just going to open up our MeanStack app, which looks like I don't actually have it in my recents. Let's see here, desktop. Okay, and you can also view this MeanStack app. I have published it. You can find it under GitHub/GCS comp 2068. And the whole MeanStack is right there. It's working. This is a great starting point if you want to take a look at this. You will be allowed to use this on the midterm as well. So it will help you with your midterm, hopefully. But you will need to do a fair amount of work on top of it as well. All right, so let's go into here real fast. So this is basically the flowchart. So for example, I have 7 examples actually altogether that explain 7 different common 7 resource routes. And these are very common. It doesn't really matter what model view controller system you work with. These 7 routes tend to be the same in every single MVC. So I'm going to show it to you in here. I think I'm also going to actually open up another file. I'll open up another project that I've worked on. Yeah, we could probably look at the distributors app because that's a big one too. So this one's written in Rails. Yeah, that's actually missing the thing we need. There it is. So this one's actually written in Rails, but I'll show you the commonality between the two. Okay, so let's open this guy, move this guy off to my other screen, and then we'll work through. So the first use case that a user likely wants to do is they want to see all the records of a resource. When I say that, we can think of our products, right, that we had in our bait shop. We want to see all the products that we have currently stored in our database. That's what the resource is. The resource is a product, or it's a, how to put it, it's kind of like your class name, right? So when you do a class inside your program, you always call your class like a noun, right? A person, place, or thing kind of thing. The resource is no different. It's just a collection of one particular noun. So in this scenario, we use product, right? That's our collection. It might be characters, or it might be artists, or it might be authors, or something like that. It can be a whole bunch of different things, but it's something that we basically want to collect and store, so we call it the resource, and everything functions around the resource itself. So that's the most important piece. All of our controller actions function around the resource, all of our views focus around the resource, and then obviously the model is the resource. Okay, so the first thing, we'll just go through this step by step. So I want to see all records of a resource. So this is the user, right? This is what they want to do. So they're going to navigate in their browser to http://myapp.com/resources, and whatever that happens to be. So I'm going to open up the MeanStack that we have here. I'll just navigate to the desktop, Georgian College, comp 2068, the means app, and then I'll run no daemon to get it to run. There we go. And now I should be able to access that in my browser at localhost 3001. And there we are. So if I take a look at what this user wants to do, I'm going to just actually move this to the left side here. They want to access http://myapp.com/resources. So the first part of this would be the HTTP myapp.com part. The next part would be the resource. So products is the name of the resource that we actually want to access. So when I hit enter, now I can see a list of all the products that I have currently stored in my database. And I only appear to have one. I'll add another one. Let's just do blue worms, giant bastards. They cost a lot of money. There we go. Cool, so now we can see all the products, and there's 2 there, so you can see that there's more than one particular product. So they navigate, and this is what they want. In order to show this, though, our application has to be able to interpret what they want. So the first thing that occurs, I'm just going to actually minimize this guy. The first thing that occurs when they enter into this is they're going to hit the router. That's the absolute first step, and we can see that if we look at the if we look at this thing here, we can see that that's the first step. So they go to this address, then they hit this router. And you can find this at the routes / whatever the name of the resource is, .js. So if we go to routes, and we're looking for products, because that's the name of our resource, we can see the router for all of our products, right? I'm just going to make this a bit smaller, because there we go. We can see all the routing, like the route paths for all of our products. So the one that they're going to need needs to match with this. It needs to match up to /resources. So the one we're looking for is get resources. Now I think this is a bit confusing because Express kind of abstracts this a bit. When you set up the app and you add the resource routes to the app.js file, it automatically assumes that this / is actually products, but it isn't. So it's just /. However, what I've done inside the main app example, I've posted what the route will look like above here. Okay, so what gets typed in the browser is the localhost 3001 /products, but what you wind up putting in your route is the /. The products part is already assumed. It's like an automatic thing, okay? So anyways, the way we read this is we can see that the route has interpreted the user's path, right? It's taken this path. It's like, oh, okay, so you want to go to /products, okay? And then it says, I'm going to match that up to this particular controller action. So this is our controller. This is the action we're going to call on the controller. Okay, and we can see that's the third step inside our flowchart. We get the route figures out which controller action to fire off, and then we fire it off to the controller. So if we go to controllers, we can see we have a products controller.js in there. If we were doing something for books, for example, and we needed authors, we would have an authors controller in here, right? And we would have to register it the same way we do above here in order to get it to work. And then we would also need another route set called authors, right? I'll dig into this a little bit more in another video on how to actually add another route set. But for now, let's just do this part. So anyways, we go to this router.get /productscontroller.index. So I want to go to this controller action. So I can open up products controller. And I can see that my controller action is right here. And that's the easiest way to look at this is if we just collapse all these guys. Each one of these corresponds to the controller action that's inside this file, inside the routes. So we can see here's the controller action for going to index, which will show all the products, and there's the actual controller action. Here's a route to going to create a new product, and there's the controller action. There's the one to show a product, so an existing product, and there's the controller action. And then same with edit, right? Create, update, and delete. You can see that all of these have paths that they're going to interpret and then send them off to these particular controller actions. Now you may wonder what these guys are. These are placeholder variables. The system uses regex to be able to decide what is a variable and what is a path. So what it does is when it reads the whole thing, for example, /new, it knows that because the keyword new is in there, to route to the new action on products controller. However, if we put in slash products slash and some random number, or anything actually, any word whatsoever, the ID will pick up and it will immediately fire it off to show. And so it treats that thing as a parameter, basically, a query string. And what will happen is that query string will become available to us in show, and we can actually utilize that to figure out which resource they're trying to access. But we'll look at that a little bit more in depth after the break. So right now we're going to deal with 3 of these. We're going to deal with the slash, the new, and the create method, and that's basically it. The other ones we're not really going to pay much attention to here. So let's take a look at index and what happens in index. So like I said, our user currently has come to this thing, we've taken them to the resource route right here, we're sending them off to products controller index, and that's now where they are, and now we can see what functionality will actually occur. If I open this guy back up, we can kind of see there's 2 things that are going to happen here. One, the controller is going to access the database and pull some information from it using the find, and we can see that that's what's occurring. So we are accessing the product model, right? So that there's no magic here, it comes from this guy right here. We're accessing the product model and we're doing a find operation on it. Find without any parameters will actually return back all of the resource, and then if everything is good and everything's successful, we're going to take the records that we got back, we're going to store them in a variable called products. We're going to assign that to our locals.products. Remember, locals is how we get variables into views. We're going to assign it to locals.products, and then we're going to do this last operation where we actually render out the products index file. So all of these, just so you are aware, all of these look like this path. And they will all be like that. Anytime we are rendering, they're always going into views regardless of whatever is in front of it. So it's going to go to views, products, and then index.ejs. We don't need to add the .ejs at the end of index because it is automatically assumed. Okay, so if we go to views now, products, we can see the index.ejs. So now you may be asking, what happens if this throws an error and there's no, like, I don't know, maybe it can't connect to the Mongo database or there's some sort of problem? That's why we have this .catch here. So what will happen is product.find, if it throws an error, the reject part of the promise will fire, and that will leapfrog over the .then and immediately call this .catch. This next error is built into Express, and it will use the Express error handling. This is not the prettiest thing in the world. It just basically boots up a page that has an error message in it. That's it. It's not like it's not really functional. You would want something better than this, but for now it's good enough, right? We're meeting our minimum viable. So let's pretend everything's all golden and we're rendering our products index page. So let's open up index.ejs. Okay, and I'm going to put this over here because I think it's a little bit easier to explain when they're side by side. So let's just move this guy to the right. Okay, and we'll shrink off that. So in index, we set this wonderful thing called locals, which is a variable, right? And locals is available to us in the view. It's immediately passed to the view. We have full access to this locals variable within our view. But it actually gets a little bit better. Any key we set in here is immediately extracted out to its own variable name, which is really, really awesome because that means we can, for example, on title, we can call the title in this page anywhere we want, right? And actually we're calling it in this included header. So if I was to open up the header file, actually I'll have to open it on this side, the header file, you can see we're calling title right here. And that is accessible because the controller is sending that variable off. Okay? So when we add the products to locals.products, that makes products now available to us inside the view. We can also call this if that's easier to understand what's happening. Okay? But we don't have to. Like, it's already been extracted for us. We have full access to products. There's no reason to do that. So we can call products. This is just a standard kind of for each loop in ES6. Basically what happens is it iterates through the products array, and it takes each element and assigns it to a new variable called product. And then now we have access to product all throughout our script. And product, when they come back from the Mongo database, they're just objects, right? So we have access to any properties of that object, such as name, description, and price, which we have defined inside our Mongo database, which I'll show a little bit later on, okay? But anyways, save it to say right now, this creates locals, like local variables for us to use in our view, and then we render the view and pass in the local variables. That's all that's happening. Not too much rocket science going on there. All right, so once that's done, our user now has their view, as we could see from here. Right, so there's our user's view, and they have all the products available to them, and they can see everything that we want them to see. So this is what's happening right now. So just to run through that one more time, real super fast. User puts in their resource route, right? The record or the request that hits the routes, right? Routes slash, and here it says resources, but the resource name that we're working with is products, right? That hits our router. It looks for this particular path, get slash resources, which if we look at the comments, we can easily find where we're going. So get slash resources would be the equivalence to this products. We know it's a get because it's router.get. This is the HTTP verbs that get used. And then we know it's accessing this particular controller action. So that's the next step, the orange piece here. Slash controllers, resource controller is going to call exports.index. We know that because it says, if this route matches, call this method on this controller. So we can open up the products controller. And we can see within the products controller what is happening. This is the logic that is occurring once this method is fired off. Okay. The other thing to note as well, Express automatically provides us with 3 handy objects to work with. One is the request, which is basically the whole request headers and body that we get back from this particular action that occurs, right? This action, this user request action that occurs. The response is the thing that we're building. It gives us a response object to start building. When we call response.render, we're basically taking the contents of this file, letting it go through the transpiler, letting it figure out all the pieces of information it requires, and then it sends back a finished HTML page to the response, and that gets stored inside the body, is basically what's happening. Next is the, you might remember when we talked about middleware, and we were talking about the different objects that go with middleware. You'll notice that all 3 of these are the same objects that go with middleware because this is middleware. It's a middleware function that we've created. Next, when it gets called, basically calls another middleware. So for example, if I was to pass show to next, then show would get called. That would be the next middleware that would get called. But instead, I'm passing error to middleware. Basically what's going to happen is that's going to trigger the express error handler, and we will get a view that basically shows that error and just spits it out. Okay, I'm not going to dive too deep into this because we will actually modify error handling when we start talking a little bit more in depth about error handling. Okay, yeah, so that's basically it in a nutshell, and then it renders the view, and the view we saw, it's just under our views folder. Nope, sorry, that's the wrong one. Views, products, index, there we go. And that's under views and products. And there we go. We can see our locals are being used, and we're outputting any information that happens to be in them. Okay. Now this is not the nicest view because we're not actually checking, to make sure that we have products before we start rendering out this thing. So if we have a bunch of empty products, like granted it shouldn't show very much because everything is kind of condensed inside this. So we really wouldn't see anything, but maybe we want to do something else like add a thing that basically a link to say create new product, you have no products, or some kind of message. We can add that logic in based on the information of this guy here. We could even call products.length, for example, on it. Okay, so that's basically that. The next one I want to show you is the create a new resource. And I kind of screwed up a little. This operation here does not happen. We don't reach out to the database for any reason. We could, I guess. We could show previous products that existed if we wanted to, but we don't. So let's walk through this operation. So I navigate to the HTTP myapp.com resources new. So I'm going to navigate to that. So we have half of it there, right? We just need to add new. That takes us to this wonderful form where we can actually fill out this form and create a brand new product. So on the back end, though, basically what's happening is we're hitting our index route like we did before, right? We're hitting this route right here, this guy right here, and it's matching up to this controller action, the .new controller action. So we can go to our controller, products controller. We can navigate to our .new operation, which is right here. And you can see not much is happening in this actual method, right? Basically, we're getting the request and the response. We set the locals so that we can set the title. That's why it says new product right here. And then we render out the view. That's all we're doing. In these first 4 actions, that's all we're doing. We're not actually making any calls to the database. We're not doing anything else. So if I open up that products.new, I'll open that up so we can see it. So that's under our views, products, and new. And you can see the header is where we're actually passing that title, which I just showed you. Other than that, we're just rendering a form. We're basically just pulling out the form and showing them this form. One key note here, though, is this particular piece. 1, we've set the verb post. And 2, we set the action to products, which means when we submit this form, it's going to submit via the post, like HTTP method, and then it's going to point to /products. And you'll notice if we look at our products route, we already have a /products, right? That's /products. The thing is, though, is our verb is get. It's not post, which means this action only happens when we are doing a get request. Okay, but we're not doing a get request in this scenario. When we submit, we're doing a post request. So the post request triggers something completely different, and it winds up triggering this method here. So it's going to go to this path, right? And it's going to fire off this controller method. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So new EJS, we're going to fill this out. So let's go back over here, and we'll fill it out. And yeah, let's make midterms a piece of bait. There we go. Oh, that's a little harsh, isn't it? There we go. And then let's make them cheap. We'll make them 10 cents. And then we create product. Now when I click this, it's going to wind up going to this action via the post method. So you're not going to see any parameters up here. All of these parameters are going to wind up getting passed through the post method inside the request body off to our products.js right here. And then that's going to wind up going to the post controller, or to the products controller, to our create method. So I'm going to actually position myself right now for that. So it's going to wind up calling this. So I'm going to click create product, and bam, we're back here and we've already got our thing. But what's actually happened, we'll slow this way down. You click submit on your form. The router has picked it up, right? We're here. It's matched what you've tried to do. It knows that you're trying to match up to products. It's going to try here first. Once it checks to see what the method is, it's going to shove itself down to here and go, no, you're trying to post. Actually, I think it probably checks the method first. That would make most sense. So it probably checks the method that it's post. It's going to look through all 3 of these to see which one matches. This one's the first one it's probably going to match up to. So /products, which we can see, post /resources. And then it's going to call off this controller action. Okay? That controller action gets called, and now we are definitely going to make a database call, but this time we're going to call the create method that's on the Mongoose model. And in there, we're going to pass it off the information from our request body. So we actually access the request body by calling request body.name, request body.description, request body.price. And then, if everything is golden, we're going to redirect back to products. And the reason why we're redirecting and not just calling one of the other controller actions is because if the user hits refresh, they can resubmit the form, which means they can create the same product over and over and over again. And some people will spam refresh accidentally, or they'll spam submit. We want to make sure that it doesn't create another instance of that product. So by redirecting, we stop that from happening. We basically take their request and we fire them back to a completely different page where they're set up for a brand new request. Okay? If an error happens, then we'll just use the default express error handling and fire it out. Otherwise, we're going to fire back off to products. And now this is a GET request that's happening. When we do a redirect, it's always a GET request. So we're actually firing off a GET request to products. If we look at our router, we know that GET requests to products is going to trigger this action method. So when we actually perform this operation, we're going to come right back up here and we're going to go through this process, which is going to display this. Okay? Pretty clean, pretty simple, easy to work with. So once again, our new operation starts with our user making the request to go to create a new resource. We intercept that through this router. We pass the we call this method because we know that this route equals out to this method in the products controller. In the products controller, we go to new and we fire off this logic. We set a locals with the title and we render out the products new. Next thing we do is we, inside that new, they click submit, which is now making this request. That hits here again. We're now in post because it's a post method. And we're firing off this route, and we're firing off this action inside the products controller. Now we hit the products controller and go to create, and this logic performs, and we end up at this view. If everything is golden, we end up at that view. If we enter information that is not okay, then it will reject it and will wind up showing an error. Okay? So that's basically this thing in a nutshell. I have printed out the understanding of our folder structures below, which will give you some information. You are welcome to use any of these agenda and notes in the midterm, so that should hopefully make things a little easier. But for example, under the My App models, that's where you're going to find all the models. The folders that we actually work with, if I can stop having a stroke, the folders that I actually work with are the models folder, right, where we will find the resource model, the views, where I will find the resource views, right, and the resource views are always under a folder with the resource name, the controllers, where I find the controllers for that particular resource, and the routes. Now, in other applications, the routes are not done quite like this. They're not done with a separate route file for the resource. I'll show you that actually. Let's open up the Rails application, and I will show you the routes file in Rails. Whoops. Okay, so here's the routes file in Rails. So for example, I have a resource called carts, and this thing here stubs out all 7 of these automatically. This basically calls a method that creates all 7 of these routes because they're so common that there's no reason to define them. Otherwise, I would have to call this get method to do it instead. That's all. But it's essentially the same thing. And then when it hits the actual controller, you can see we still have the same actions. Index, show, new, edit, create, update, and they call theirs destroy instead of delete. But essentially it's the same controller actions. Okay? And then these also relate to a views folder. Under my app, under views, there's carts, Here's the carts controller. If I go to carts, you can see that we have an index, a new, a show, an edit, right? Same as these guys here. Same views. And it's like that inside CodeIgniter, it's like that inside Laravel, it's like that in many different languages, including the Sparky one that we just recently created, but it's a common practice for resource routing. Okay, makes it very easy to see. It also helps that everything is named the same, so you know that everything to do with products, you should be able to at least see the word product on every single piece here. Either it's the plural or it's the singular. So if we had a system called person, then we would have people all over the place and person all over the place, right? Anywhere it's singular would be person, anywhere it's plural would be people. All right, so I hope that helps. I'm going to move on to the next part, and we're actually going to create this thing that I just showed you in the next few pieces, and then maybe that will help clarify it. But please, keep referring back to this. This will help you. Eventually, it will just make sense. Something will click, and it should just make sense going forward because it is built with common sense. It's not magic. There's no magic happening here. There is name convention handling that happens in like bigger systems like Rails and stuff that they use to be able to create these helpful methods like that resource thing I just showed you that kind of make things a little easier. But in here, the fact that we're actually not dealing with some, next level kind of meta programming should make this a little bit clearer. All right, so I'm going to stop the video there, and then I'll record the next piece.